You can't afford a lawyer. My father-in-law, Arthur, sneered across the courtroom, his diamond ring catching the fluorescent light. You're an uneducated nobody. Accept the scraps we're offering or walk away with zero. My husband, David, stood behind his father, avoiding my eyes. They had spent 3 years systematically isolating me, emptying our joint accounts, and trying to steal full custody of my 6-year-old daughter. They thought they had backed me into a corner. Arthur had hired the most expensive corporate firm in the city, while I sat alone at the defense table with a single manila folder. Plaintiff counsel, state your name for the record. The judge called out. Arthur smirked, convinced he'd already won. But then, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. High-heeled shoes echoed against the marble floor. The entire courtroom went silent as my brother walked in. My name is Clara Vance. I'm 32 years old, and up until 6 months ago, I truly believed I was living a life built on mutual love and respect. But standing in the cold hallway outside courtroom 4B, I realized my entire 7-year marriage had been nothing more than a carefully calculated business arrangement where I was the only one who didn't know the rules. David and I met when we were both 25. He was charm personified, the heir to his father's lucrative commercial real estate empire. My father-in-law, Arthur Vance, was a towering man who ruled both his family and his company with an iron fist. From the day I moved into their world, Arthur made sure I knew my place. Quiet, agreeable, and entirely dependent. When our daughter, Lily, was born, Arthur persuaded David that it made no sense for me to keep my modest job in administrative publishing. Focus on raising the legacy, Arthur had said smoothly over Sunday dinner. Foolishly, I surrendered my financial independence, trusting the man who promised to protect us. The mask slipped 3 months ago when I caught David funneling funds out of our joint savings into private offshore accounts. When I confronted him, he didn't apologize. Instead, he handed me a pre-drafted separation agreement that stripped me of every dime, our home, and most terrifyingly, shared physical custody of Lily. When I refused to sign, Arthur stepped in, cutting off my credit cards, freezing my access to household accounts, and threatening to drown me in legal fees until I was completely broke and homeless. The weeks leading up to the trial were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Arthur didn't just want to win the divorce. He wanted to destroy my spirit so completely that I wouldn't even have the energy to stand up in court. First came the financial strangulation. Overnight, my cards were declined at the grocery store. When I called the bank, the teller quietly informed me that my name had been removed from all joint accounts, authorized by David's primary signature. When I tried to access my small personal savings account, money I'd kept from before our marriage, I discovered it had been wiped clean through a series of automated transfers I never authorized. Then came the social isolation. Arthur made sure his influence reached every corner of our town. Mutual friends who had attended our dinner parties suddenly stopped answering my calls. Local family law attorneys I contacted for consultation mysteriously declined to represent me, citing vague conflicts of interest. It didn't take a genius to realize Arthur's corporate legal team had put half the city's top firms on retainer just to conflict them out. They even turned my living situation into a prison. David changed the locks on our home while I was taking Lily to the park, forcing me to move into a rundown, short-term motel on the edge of town. Arthur called me the night I checked in, his voice dripping with condescending victory. You see, Clara? You have no money, no friends, and no legal standing. You can't afford a lawyer to fight us. Sign the papers, give us full custody, and maybe David will give you a monthly allowance for rent. They thought they had stripped away everything I had. But they forgot one crucial detail. Desperation makes a mother exceptionally dangerous. I had 48 hours to clear my remaining personal belongings out of the house before Arthur's security team barred me from the property permanently. With 2 hired movers standing by, I forced myself to walk up the narrow fold-down stairs into the dusty, humid attic. I wasn't looking for jewelry or heirlooms. I was just trying to collect the childhood photo albums I wanted Lily to have. Deep in a back corner, tucked beneath a stack of Arthur's discarded corporate filing boxes, I bumped against a heavy, brass-bound wooden chest. It was locked, covered in a thick layer of untouched dust. I recognized it immediately. It belonged to my late father. When my father passed away 8 years ago, David had insisted on storing his personal estate paperwork up here, promising he'd help me organize it when I was ready. In the grief that followed, I had completely forgotten it existed. I used a heavy crowbar from the mover's toolbox to pop the old brass latch. Inside, beneath dusty leather journals and old family photographs, I found a thick, bound manila folder tied with faded red string. As I flipped through the yellowed pages, my breath hitched. These weren't just old family letters. They were detailed financial records, corporate partnership deeds, and personal correspondence between my late father and Arthur Vance dating back 30 years. Among those papers was a handwritten ledger and a legal power of attorney document bearing a signature I hadn't seen in over a decade, a signature that belonged to my estranged older brother. My brother, Julian, was 8 years older than me, and for the first half of my life, he was my absolute hero. But when our father fell gravely ill a decade ago, a bitter rift tore our family apart. At the time, David, who was just my fiancé, convinced me that Julian was trying to siphon off our father's estate for himself. Young, grieving, and hopelessly in love, I believed David. I took his advice, severed all contact with my brother, and allowed Arthur's legal team to handle the estate settlement. Julian tried to warn me back then, telling me I was being manipulated by predators, but I refused to listen. Hurt and alienated, Julian walked away, stepping out of my life entirely. Holding those yellowed documents in the dim light of the attic, the painful truth finally struck me like a physical blow. Julian hadn't been trying to steal from us. He had been trying to stop Arthur and David from quietly absorbing my father's commercial patents, the very patents that had formed the hidden bedrock of the Vance family's real estate empire. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone. It was midnight, just 8 hours before my final custody hearing. I dialed the number listed on a recent corporate legal registry I found online under Julian's name. When a deep, familiar voice answered on the third ring, I broke down in tears. "Julian, it's Clara. You were right about everything." The oak doors at the back of courtroom 4B swung wide, the sharp click of leather heels echoing against the marble floor. Every head turned as a tall, imposing figure in a charcoal-tailored suit walked down the central aisle, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. Arthur Vance scoffed, leaning over to whisper something dismissive to David. "Looks like she hired some cheap public defender at the last second," Arthur sneered under his breath. My brother, Julian, didn't even look at them. He walked straight past the gallery, pushed through the wooden gate, and stood right beside me at the defense table. He placed a steady, warm hand on my shoulder, giving me a quiet nod that instantly anchored the trembling fear in my chest. "May I ask who is joining the defense table?" Judge Miller asked, peering over his reading glasses with a sharp, inquisitive look. Julian unbuttoned his jacket, adjusted his cuffs, and stepped forward with absolute, commanding authority. "Julian Ross, Your Honor. Senior Managing Partner at Ross, Sterling and Associates. I am appearing as co-counsel on behalf of the respondent, my sister, Clara Vance." The air left the room in a collective gasp. Across the aisle, Arthur's lead attorney froze. The smug expression on his face instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer panic. Ross, Sterling and Associates wasn't just a law firm. It was the most feared corporate litigation powerhouse on the West Coast, famous for dismantling corrupt executives and exposing high-stakes financial fraud. Arthur's attorney leaned over, frantically whispering to Arthur, whose face had turned entirely pale. He realized in an instant that the uneducated nobody he had tried to crush was no longer standing alone. Julian opened his leather briefcase with deliberate, practiced ease, pulling out a thick, bound forensic accounting dossier and placing it squarely on the podium. "Your Honor," Julian began, his voice echoing with effortless authority, "before we address the matter of temporary custody, my client requests an immediate emergency stay on all proceedings, as well as an order freezing the petitioner's assets." Arthur's lead attorney practically threw himself toward the bench. "Objection. Your Honor, this is a standard divorce proceeding. Opposing counsel is attempting to delay and turn this into a circus." "Overruled," Judge Miller warned, his eyes fixed on Julian. Proceed, Mr. Ross. Julian didn't even glance at Arthur's legal team. For the past 3 years, Mr. David Vance and his father, Arthur Vance, have engaged in systematic bankruptcy fraud, tax evasion, and marital asset dissipation. They have illegally funneled over $4 million out of joint marital accounts into undisclosed shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. A wave of hushed whispers rippled through the gallery. David slumped back in his chair, his jaw hanging open, while Arthur's knuckles turned white against the mahogany table. Furthermore, Julian continued, holding up the yellowed documents from our father's chest, we have uncovered irrefutable evidence that the primary commercial patents generating the Vance family's corporate revenue were acquired through fraudulent conversion of my late father's estate, patents that legally belonged to my sister, Clara. Julian stepped toward the bench, handing the forensic audit directly to the judge. We have already filed federal affidavits with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and the Securities and Exchange Commission. Every account controlled by Vance Enterprises is currently under federal review. Judge Miller flipped through the pages, his expression growing darker with every passing second. He slammed his gavel down so hard it rang like a gunshot through the room. All assets belonging to the petitioner are frozen effective immediately, the judge declared sternly. Mr. Vance, your legal team has 2 hours to produce full disclosure of these accounts, or I will cite you for civil contempt. The fall of the Vance empire was swift and relentless. Within 6 months, federal investigators dismantled their network of shell companies. Facing imminent criminal charges for fraud and tax evasion, Arthur and David were forced to sell their family estate just to cover their soaring legal fees and back taxes. The court granted me sole legal and physical custody of Lily, along with full restitution for my father's stolen patents. Today, as I watch Lily play in the sunlit garden of our new home, I finally feel the peace that was stolen from me for so long. Julian visits every weekend, making up for the lost years and reminding me that real family never leaves you behind. Arthur thought I was weak because I had no money. He forgot that truth, love, and justice are priceless, and they always win in the end. What would you have done if you found out your in-laws were hiding your own family's legacy from you? Let me know in the comments below.